All right. Ban and restricted announcement. Everybody's done their, reaction videos, and I did on stream, which you can find in the description below, socials or whatever, on what is going to be possibly what's going to be banned, restricted, nerfed, or whatever. I had a hot take that Modern wasn't going to see anything, and most people disagree that there was going to be at least one card ban. And as you can see, the ban and restricted announcement, as of this recording 2 days ago, it's the update 27th in the morning. So, but just gonna go over this real quick and give my thoughts on it. So, standard, all runs Epiphany, Divide by Zero, and Faceless Haven are banned. Um, so the majority of the community thought that standard was basically a dead format because of alchemy being released in standard and COVID basically also making a big deal out of no paper events and standard getting set to the wayside with OP and the release of alchemy on arena and digital only format and whatnot. But these bans, we all knew that Epiphany was eventually going to be banned. It was just a matter of time. But what really stood out is Divide by Zero getting banned and Faceless Haven. This card was going to go just because you can't nerf in standard paper. It would just be too complicated. So banning it outright is just fine. And this basically nerfs the blue decks by a lot. And Hullbreaker Horror doesn't really matter that much. And I'm surprised by Divide by Zero, but in standard, this card basically is the catch-all removal spell at 3 mana. So, also coupled with Leer. So, Divide by Zero is basically can tag anything, and counter spells, specifically blue spells, have a hard time with resolve spells. So the way to get around counter magic in theory is to basically get under them. Play a 1-drop, play a 2-drop, play a bunch of 2-drops, whatever, and you get around their counter magic. Divide by Zero, while being a counterspell, is also a removal spell in that the tempo swing is so bad that it doesn't matter if you counter anything. And that was the problem with blue decks facing them, was their decks were 4 Fading Hope and 4 Divide by Zero. So they would Fading Hope your 2-drop or 1-drop, and then they would Divide by Zero your 3 or 4-drop, and you're just sitting there with no pressure, and it's turn 5, turn 6, and they're ready to untap and turn the corner. Well, they can't do that anymore. And Divide by Zero was kind of like one of those, well, if I don't counter it and I draw it, I could just bounce their stuff anyway. And it being a 3 mana catch-all removal spell is why it's probably too good in standard specifically, and we'll get to the alchemy rebalances later. But I'm not that surprised now, given that it's on the actual ban list now, right? So you could have done a lot, and Divide by Zero getting banned is probably the most safe, and that's probably fine. If you ban Leer, you basically just nerf the blue control decks to the ground, and they're probably not playable now. But with banning Divide by Zero, you could still play the Leer decks, just they're not going to look the same now. They're not going to be this 4 Fading Hope for, they don't have Divide by Zero anymore, so now they have to think of another spell to play. And now they're going to have to decide whether or not they're going to play more counter magic, or they're going to play more removal spells, whatever. So this puts the onus on the blue deck to evolve past Divide by Zero. They're going to look a lot different now. The Faceless Haven ban, I understand, but I don't think this is good enough. The main crux of the aggro decks, and I understand why they did this, this is sort of like a bit of a foresight problem, in that if you ban the blue cards, that now the aggro decks that were built to beat them are just too fast or too powerful, a little bit too good. And Faceless Haven being a utility land that is a lot better or a lot easier to activate in the monocolor decks, being that it's only technically 3 mana, and a lot of the creature lands from not Crimson Vow, but in the most recent set, that they're allowed to they cost more mana to activate. So Faceless Haven only being 3 mana is a lot easier to activate, and it's a 4/3, but 4 damage is a lot. Especially post sweeper, where you're playing a 1, 2, and 3, the opponent sweeps the board with Burn Down the House or whatever, and then you activate Faceless Haven a couple times and they're dead. So getting rid of Faceless Haven, nerfing the monocolor decks is an idea, but the problem now is you've basically left 2 cards that are probably going to have to get banned eventually, but we'll see. We'll see if the meta shakes out the way it's supposed to. And that's the wait and see approach. And that's Goldspan Dragon and Esika's Chariot. So, and some decks will play them together. So we'll see if the black decks or the blue decks can muster up a few innovations to get around those. And the one card that the deck that I'm envisioning, I'm not saying it's going to be good, is basically you're playing Grixis and you're just playing a bunch of Soul Shatters and Prismari commands in your deck. So I'm not saying that's going to be good, but that's where I would start if you're going to combat the Goldspan Dragon, Esika Chariot decks, or the Dragon decks, the Izzet Dragon decks, or the Jund decks that are trying to just basically use the that's your mid-range plan, where you just go turn 3 Chariot, turn 4 Goldspan Dragon, and beat face. So we'll see. But the Faceless Haven ban is the most I'm most surprised about. And these bans make standard playable now. But how playable is we'll see. I will not be surprised if more bans come in the coming months. But they're probably gonna wait until after Kamigawa releases and then see where we're at, because there's unconfirmed spells or unconfirmed cards, but some of them look promising, so we'll see. But this is a good start, in my opinion. Legacy, I don't care about. Eventually, Daze and Brainstorm will get so many cards banned that they'll finally take action, but another card bites the dust. But I don't play Legacy, so I don't know. But after you've written basically the same reasoning to banning threats, because they're too good, and your reasoning is, well, they're backed up by Daze and Force of Will and Brainstorm and blah blah blah. It's just like, when are you gonna ban the blue cards? Because they've been getting stuff banned all the time, and sort of like the Teferi problem. How many more cards do you need to ban before you ban the actual problem? So I don't really care about this. No bans in Modern. I was on the... I don't play Modern, but I saw a lot of people complaining about 3 cards. That was Lurrus, Ragavan, and Teferi. 3 Fairy, or Teferi Time Raveler. And I was surprised to see Lurrus not on this list a little bit, but I also thought it didn't look like the format from the actual Modern players. They were saying it's not that big of a deal. In fact, they were wondering if there were going to be unbans like Tapad or Twin or whatever. And I'm a proponent of things coming off the ban list as opposed to stuff being on it or going on it. So, but Legacy, I don't really care about. Historic. Memory Lapse is finally banned, so you're going to get some wild cards. And Teferi getting a rebalance. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. I don't really care about their descriptions and why, because typically we already know why. They're too good. So, Memory Lapse, I'm actually fine with this card, but the thing is like, you're in a digital format. Why is this card not rebalanced? And the easiest way to rebalance this card is just turn it into a different type of Aether Gust, where you counter the spell and then the opponent gets to choose whether they put it on top or on the bottom. It doesn't get to target, stuff in play like Gust does, and you basically allow, cards to stay in and come off the suspension list to figure out what. So that's basically what the suspension list should be: is cards come off or go onto the suspension list, and you figure out what you want to do with them, right? If you really want to change them, and then you change them, and then you release them back to the format. If you want to use that, that's what the suspension list is for. If not, then you just change them outright and then just release them back. But stuff going on the ban list is whatever. And I'm a proponent, much like Hooglin is, that stuff on the historic ban list outside of the Mystical Archive cards, which already have toned down versions of themselves, and the best way to describe that is Demonic Tutor. We already have two versions of that, and that's Diabolic Tutor, Mastermind's Acquisition, and Grim Tutor. And the only way to really balance Demonic Tutor is basically make it a 3-mana spell. The end. But you can basically delete that card from the format if you're not going to let us use it. I guess it's there for Cube. Whatever. Alright. So, the majority of the Alchemy rebalancing is basically they don't want to ban stuff. So basically Acererak, and these are the changes. These are the buffs. And I'm just going to say outright, most of these, I know what they're trying to do, and honestly, they just need to stop. The majority of these cards are going to be the dungeon cards, and they realize that the dungeon mechanic was just for limited, and they want to make it better, but they need to stop. They need to take cards that are actually competitive or just slightly not competitive and make them competitive cards. And the majority of these changes, you're just going to be disappointed. Acererak, most people didn't even know about the opponent's option to sacrifice. It was basically flavor text, which they don't have anymore, and now you just automatically get the 2/2 black zombie token. But how many times has Acererak actually been in play for this to happen, where you didn't complete an actual dungeon? It's like rare, right? So this change means virtually nothing. It's irrelevant. This card's almost unplayable anyways. If this was a 6/6 or gave the power a 6 and turned into a 6/4, then maybe, because then you're able to like cruise some stuff, and give it some power with some other cards. But being a 5/5 for 3 that doesn't stay in play is just unplayable. Assemble from Parts was a 5-mana reanimate spell. Now it's a 4-mana investment where it costs 1, and then it has 2 black. So basically, it's a 3 black, 1 colorless. To make the reanimate. I don't think this is good enough. The problem with this card is you have to target and get it to go off, and you're only getting a 4/4 out of it. So what are we doing here? In Alchemy, maybe, but in Historic, no. Like, this is not good enough. You already have cards that do this that are better on rate. Priest and Unburial Rites and many others that cost a lot, or they're much easier to cast than this card is, and you're getting the full value. So yeah, it's an instant, but the activation cost is a sorcery, so it doesn't matter that you cast this for 1 and then give it the clause, right? So I know what they're trying to do and they explain it, but you gotta just take the you could take the activation cost as a sorcery off. Maybe it's playable then. Blood Rage Alpha is now a 4/4 instead of a 4/3. This card was already... this doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it good enough. If this was basically Flame Tongue Kavu, then maybe. But the fact that this doesn't do it is why this is unplayable. You're competing at the 4-drop slot for the Werewolves deck, and this just doesn't make it any better. You gotta make this into basically Flame Tongue Kavu for this to see play. So, and the fact that it doesn't do that is... nah. Cloister Gargoyle, making it instead of a 3-drop is now a 2-drop, and it's not a 0-4, it's a 0-3. Honestly, they could have made this a 0-4. Does this make this any more playable than it already wasn't? No. Being a 0-4 doesn't matter. Being an 0-3 doesn't matter. The thing that matters is this venture into the dungeon means nothing. So, it's whatever. Dungeon Descent now comes into play untapped, and now it only costs 1 to activate. Still activate as a sorcery. This is interesting, but again, the dungeon mechanic is unplayable because the value is so minuscule. Scrying or making an opponent lose 1 on the first couple of times that you venture doesn't matter. The payoff is not good enough. You're not drawing cards. You're not getting immediate value off the dungeon. And completing it by turn 6, turn 7 is not game swinging. You don't win the game or put yourself in a position to win the game. So like these dungeon cards, you're going to see a bunch of them, which we've already done already, where it leaves a lot left to be desired for this. This is interesting, but if the dungeon mechanic was better, like the actual abilities of each room in the dungeon, maybe. But no. Maybe with Magda, but you still have to pay like 2 or 3 mana for this. Where you already have that mechanic in, getting that value with Jaspera Sentinel or other stuff. Eliwick, Planeswalker ability now. The ultimate now costs -6 instead of -7. That wasn't the problem with this card. The problem with this card is it doesn't protect itself at 4 mana. And getting your ultimate 1 turn faster doesn't matter because it never won the game anyway. So, sure. More unplayable stuff. Doesn't change anything. Fate's Reversal now costs 1 black instead of 2. Raised Deads are not that good. Venturing doesn't change this card. Doesn't matter. Still unplayable. Raised Deads are just not good. Find the Path. Now adds 2 mana of any 1 color instead of double green. The reason why this wasn't seeing play in Alchemy specifically is because we already have a better card than this, and that's Settle the Wilds. This doesn't see play in Historic because there are better mana ramp spells and at cheaper mana cost, and you have better 3-drops in this slot than Find the Path in Standard. This card's terrible. Venture in the Dungeon doesn't change this. This isn't Winding, Weird Winding or whatever that spell was from Eldritch Moon where you got a clue, or Gift of Paradise where you gain 3 life. The Venture doesn't change anything because you have better cards in this. God, heaven forbid you play this and it gets Skyclave Apparition. Ugh. Puppet Razor is now a 3/3, is a 3/4 instead of a 3/3. This card was still unplayable to begin with. Making it a 3/4 doesn't change that. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 creature card from your graveyard. If you do, seek a creature card of equal mana value. That doesn't matter. There's better cards than this. The Connoisseur is better than this. Yeah, it's a zombie, but Precipitous Drop. 2 color or 2 cost, 1 black, 1 color instead of 3. Another Venture card. Creature gets -2/-2. If you completed a dungeon, it gets -5/-5. Interesting in Historic with Lurrus, but there's better cards than this. Myra's Grasp was -3/-3, and you have Deadweight, that's -2/-2, and the Venture in the Dungeon, most of the cards that are in Lurrus that play the enchantments get draw cards. So Venture in the Dungeon doesn't really change that. If this costs 1, then maybe. Chris B said this probably, if this had Flash, maybe, but the way it is now as a sorcery is just unplayable at 2. And the problem with most of these is like they're already unplayable and the changes don't make them any more playable. It's kind of like these are slight buffs, not significant. Triumphant Adventurer is now a 2/1 instead of a 1/1. This probably is the best one out of the bunch. Absent the Venture in the Dungeon, a 2/1 first strike Death Touch is nothing to sneeze at for the dungeon deck. And if you're going to play the dungeon mechanic, you're going to play this. with Nadar, and then now you're actually completing a dungeon fairly quickly. But the three color Abzan, no, you're just gonna play the 2-color, and if you're gonna play 4 of these. The 2-1 actually makes it somewhat competitive, and this is probably good enough, but it's not like insane out of this world. But it's playable. But this is probably the one that probably sees the most play out of all the changes. But it's still like relatively bad because it dies to everything. But it's hard to block. So maybe probably try this, but all right. The meat and the potatoes are the cards that I actually care about because, like I said, I thought buffs would be better, but the nerfs are the ones that I really cared about to what they were gonna do, and they nerfed a lot more cards than I thought they would. So we're gonna see, where their heads are at, where WotC is. All right, the first one is Divide by Zero. So it got banned in Standard. Really, this only matters in Alchemy. It doesn't matter in Historic because this is based. Divide by before the changes wasn't playable in Historic anyway because you had better 2 and 3 mana stuff like Archmage's Charm and better mana to cast stuff. So like the Divide stuff didn't matter. But now in Alchemy, you only get to learn if you target a spell or a permanent that has 4 mana value 4 or less, and I don't know if this makes the change worth it. We'll see. But we're going to talk about another card that probably just makes basically Leer decks unplayable. And it's not because of this. It's probably still playable at this. So we'll see if this matters. But the control decks were already bad, like not good. Last weekend, given the Rakdos and the Gruul Werewolves deck. So they were already going to have to make changes, but the nerfs basically just nerfed the deck to the ground. So, and the mid-range and the aggro decks saw no changes whatsoever. So probably that's good enough. But this will still see play, but not in the package that we think. But this is fine. Yeah. All right. Fearsome Whelp now triggers only on upkeep, and the balance for that is now it gains haste. This is basically now unplayable in the Dragon's deck now because you don't get the immediate value. And that was basically why this saw play, is because the immediate value it gave you if the opponent didn't have a 1 mana or 2 mana instant removal spell, either on the play or on the draw, depending. So now that it triggers on your upkeep, you're now allowed to interact with it, which is the whole point, but this is unplayable now. You just probably cut this from the Dragon's deck now, and you just play more interaction, because the chances of you getting the upkeep trigger now is a lot less than it was when you got it on the end step. So now black decks can play Bloodchief's Thirst now, and that was virtually an unplayable Magic card in Alchemy except in one deck. And you're allowed to play some sorcery speed removal spells now because Fearsome Whelp is basically unplayable now. Yeah. So the haste doesn't matter. It's a 1/1. The fact that it triggers on your upkeep is just so bad. People will try it, but it's not the same. You're just gonna play the orb now because that's the only value you're gonna get. And yep. I don't even think, and also I don't think the change was warranted, considering that the explosive draws that it got was like, that was the whole draw to the deck. That's what made the deck good, is the potential to just be like, I have 3 or 4 major threats. Can you answer them? And Fearsome Whelp basically gave you the power to do that. Now it's kind of like, now you have some play with it, which is fine. Like, that's the whole point. But at the same time, that's what gave the Dragons that competitive edge, which it made it good. But as if it was already, like, I don't want to say luck dependent, but draw dependent. Now with Whelp gone, it's kind of like, where's my explosiveness or the eight ramp spells now? So I'm not saying the Dragon's deck is dead, but this basically means that they have to play more removal spells now to compensate for losing the power or the explosive draws now. Hullbreaker Horror. The change here is the cannot be countered clause is gone, and if they were gonna, I said in the stream that if I was going to nerf it, that was one of the changes, but this wasn't the mirror breaker in the control mirror, because you didn't just jam this on 7, because every deck had just enough removal, and they're playing Divide by Zero, where the counter clause didn't matter. So I wonder where their headspace was when they made the change, because the only thing this does is now it makes Disdainful Stroke a much better spell, which is fine, but this wasn't the Mirror Breaker. The Mirror Breaker was being able to be out efficient your opponent. Excuse me. Can you play more lands than your opponent? Can you out mana them? Can you draw less removal spells? Can you draw less bad cards in the game 1? And yeah, so the Mirror Breaker is casting a bunch of Discover the formulas, not cast. How many times can you cast Hullbreaker Horror? So the reason they played it as a one of in the main deck, and the reason I played it in my main, was because of how many spots, regardless of the counter clause, how many spots it bails you out. But now that it doesn't have the counterspell clause, now it could be hit potentially by every counterspell like Jori's Disruption, Disdainful Stroke, and many others. And now it just basically means that you're only bringing it in certain spots, because it's not the end-all be-all, which it never really was. It was more of an end-all be-all against the aggro decks than the control mirror, because of if you untap with it, the game was over. So like, it would bail you out in spots that you had no business winning, especially in the aggro or the mid-range matchup. That was where it was shining. It wasn't really that big of a deal in the control matchup, because they had so many ways to bounce it, Divide by Zero, etc. So maybe, but the nerf that we're going to talk about here soon, maybe this is fine in the control mirror now, but I don't know. It's a wait and see game. I would much rather this thing not be able to target itself or lose flash, but whatever, it's fine. Inquisitor Captain now has the cast clause. You have to cast it now to get the value, which is what I said was most likely going to happen in the stream, where I was talking about what you could do to nerf. So this basically means the Captain decks and the Cleric decks don't play this, and they don't play blue anymore. And it's basically unplayable now. If this is probably a white aggro card to get value, to basically punch through to get an added creature to the board. But as far as the mid-range piles in Historic, Alchemy, and Standard, or not Standard, but Alchemy, where they were using the Glasspool Mimics and etc., where they had to now you have to actually cast it, they don't play this card anymore. So, and it was warranted. The explosiveness that they got, they could just go have 9 Inquisitor Captains on the battlefield, is just ridiculous. And in Historic, they get to just keep doing it turn after turn with Soul Herder and Ephemerates and whatnot. I'm not saying the deck was absurd in that format, but in Alchemy it was exceptionally just egregious, because it was just you just win games that you have no business winning. It's oh, did I draw Captain? Nope. Okay, good. Now it's you have to draw it and you have to actually play with it, not just I play it, now I get a bunch of copy spells, and now I have a bunch of 3/3s and I kill you next turn. So, here's what I was talking about. Lear getting the nerf. Now it only works on your turn. I said in the stream that I would have made it 1 spell per turn, but this only on your turn basically means that you're probably not playing this anymore, especially in Alchemy, because the on your turn doesn't matter. The main crux of this was you played it on turn 6, turn 7, turn 8. And you're able to play Fading Hope, Vanishing Verse, all the instants that you could to protect this and kill a bunch of stuff and have counter spells for days, like Divide by Zero and Fading Hope and whatnot. And now basically that doesn't happen anymore. So sorcery speed removal is not that good, and the only reason you were playing this was to get the instance, because that's the majority of the stuff that you were playing. So, yeah, I don't see this being played anymore. Basically nerfed to the ground. And the spells can't be countered. Who cares? You're not playing this on turn 5, turn 6, turn 7. You're not playing this at all because you can't use it on their turn. So now probably there's better stuff to play. Imrith and many other things. So the blue control decks are now going to have to actually like work for their wins instead of untapping with Leer and basically saying I win. So yeah, that's fine. Brushstroke now only they remove the gain life trigger. I really think it should have been the life loss as opposed to gaining life. Like, who cares about the life gain part? The point being is that you could have 2 or 3 of these out, and one sacrifice one blow token is a lightning bolt. Like, what? Yeah, it should have been the life gain clause that should have stayed in the life loss, but whatever. I mean, I really thought that it should have been the blood artist that should have got removed, or the life loss, because that's so annoying. But it's fine. This is still playable. That nerf is not that big of a deal. Town Racer Tyrant got a buff. The R is capitalized. That's the nerf or the buff. And the nerf only hitting non-basics is a joke. That's not a nerf. Most decks, if not all of them in Alchemy, all play at least one non-basic, and that's a creature land, especially in the monocolor decks, which didn't really see play that much. And if you're playing against a 2-color deck or more, that's all they're playing as non-basics. Flip lands, slow lands, creature lands, everything. And the monocolor decks have like 4 to 6 creature lands. So, alright. And some of them are even playing Forsaken Crossroads. So, that non-basic is a joke. This is not a nerf. This is still the best card in the damn format. So, whatever. And the last one is Teferi. Balance Adjustment now costs 4. And now it only works, the passive only works on your turn, meaning your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. And it has 5 loyalty instead of 4. This card's unplayable. The main reason why Teferi was so good is because you played it on turn 3 and you couldn't play instants ever. So, yeah, you play it and they can't interact with you on your turn, but turn 4 is a lot more, is an eternity in Historic. And the fact that you don't stop any of the reasons why the passive was so good is why the card is played everywhere. So now that it doesn't do that, and you made it cost 1 extra, and you know a bunch of other stuff, like the adding the extra loyalty doesn't matter because Unholy Eat's in the format, and you don't stop it from being cast from the graveyard or stop Finale or whatever. So, and adding the extra, this card is so bad now, which is fine because releasing it into the wild as it was is probably too good in this format in Historic, but this is so bad. Like, this is the equivalent to what they did to Omnath. So, yeah. This card will see play just because people want to see if it's good, and it's not. 4 mana for a rare Planeswalker that only has 2 abilities, that doesn't have an ultimate, and doesn't stop anything on the opponent's turn, and you know, you're not even really protecting it that much, because by the time it's turn 4, you're not really doing much. This is a control mirror sideboard card at the most. So I can't see this being played in main decks. And if it is, it's like a one of, because control is actually a deck in Historic. So alright. But that's the majority of the changes and what I think about them. But majority of the Historic changes is only to Inquisitor Captain. So The life gain decks just don't play Captain anymore. They're just playing collected companies now, and you don't get the Bant Captain decks anymore, where they get like a million ways to copy it. So that deck's basically dead, which is what I'm focusing on because of the MIQ that's like in a week and a half. And Lear wasn't really that played in Historic. Sanguine Brushstroke was played a little bit, but not really. And nobody was really playing Talonraiser Tyrant. Really, the Historic changes, the only thing you did was basically nerf the life gain decks with Inquisitor Captain that were playing it. But the majority of the changes were mostly for Alchemy's sake, not Historic. So releasing Teferi into the wild as a changed card and maybe Captain are the only real changes in Historic that matter, and they don't really move the needle of changing how the format is. Meaning the best decks are still the best decks. Phoenix is still tier 1. Life Gain Scurry Out combo is still tier 1. And Green Black Food with Cat Oven decks, I'll just lump them all together. The Cat Oven decks are still tier 1. And the control decks that are built to beat those 3 decks are still tier 1. And the rest of the format is trying to beat them. And none of the changes help to do that. So look for those decks to still be relevant in the MIQ that's coming up this weekend. Or next weekend, excuse me. Not this weekend, but then weekend after. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to check out the stream. Don't forget to check out the Twitter and all the socials in the bottom. Don't forget to like and subscribe and what you think and all that. And I'll see you in the next video.